So I was homeschooling my son the other day, and they get online lessons and videos, and the topic or the subject he was learning about, they called it social studies, but it was kind of basic, being that he's in second grade. So it was really more of like a civics, and it was about rules, and it was about the importance of following rules, and why they have rules, why rules exist, what their purpose is, and the main point being why it's so important that you follow the rules. There was a segment within the video that was, what if everybody did that, right? What if everybody broke the rules? What if everybody littered, right? That it would obviously be a bad thing. And trying to get them to understand why they're there. So at first pass, I was like, oh, that's good, because my view is always, you should always know why. So there's a rule, and what they're saying is, let's explain why we have rules and what their importance is. And that's great, because rules are needed. I'm certainly not anti-rules. But it was very quickly into the video where I found myself a little bit more troubled, and found myself pausing the video a couple times to actually just talk to my son and intervene with a different perspective on it. The video literally started with a phrase that said, for you to be a good citizen in your community, you have to follow the rules. And as soon as I heard that, I took issue. I was troubled because, there's the obvious. If you've listened to any of my videos, you understand how I think, or even just the way I'm presenting this, that certainty of, for you to be good, right, whatever it is, to be a good citizen in your community, you have to follow the rules. That might seem innocent enough. And I can understand why a school wants to teach that to a 6 or 7-year-old, because they're trying to keep structure and order in the classroom. So they need them to understand there's rules to be followed. And I'm sure there are certain kids who need that input, right? Not to say my kid's better, worse, or indifferent. Every kid's different, but I'm sure there's some kids that naturally think, if rules aren't important, I don't need to follow them. So they're trying to teach to that. That's an important component of it. But conditioning it in that way, teaching it in such a way where you have at least a portion of the kids who are just learning that when you hear about a rule, or when a rule is put in place, you just follow it. You don't question it. You don't. And it's not that they implicitly said you should never ask a question, but they didn't say that you should or that it was okay. The implication again was the right thing to do is just follow the rule. And so I stopped the video and I, started talking to my son, and I said, listen, rules are important. And it's important that you understand that, if you break rules, there's consequences. But with that said, if there's a rule that doesn't make sense to you, or it seems off, or you're just not sure about it, right? You have a question, you should feel well within your rights to politely, respectfully ask a question about it and try and understand it better, whoever, is imposing that rule. Again, you can't just break it, or you could, but there's going to be consequences potentially. You might get in trouble, you might go to the principal's office, you might get arrested, right? Depending on the circumstance. But it's important to understand that you should understand why that rule exists. And if it feels wrong to you, you should feel very comfortable to push back on it. And I gave him some silly examples or some practical examples. So the first one was just, if there was a rule that you just had to, push the kid in your class, let's say Steven, I'm making it up, let's push Steven on the floor every time you walk past him, that would seem like a strange rule. And he got that. And he said, yeah, no, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I do that? And then I said, well, that's my point. So, we're kind of establishing and proving the point that there could be a rule that is bad, right? So his mind went right to a place of like, oh, okay, so it's pretty cut and dry. There's some bad rules, there's some good rules. It'll be easy for me to identify. If it's the bad rule, I get it. I need to respectfully ask and see, what's going on. But then I wanted him to understand that it's not always cut and dry. It's not always clear. So I talked about an example of, let's say your teacher says you can't drink water at your desk. And you think, well, that seems wrong because I'm really thirsty and I need water. Why couldn't I drink it at my desk? It may seem like a bad rule, but when you ask her about it, she might explain, well, I don't want you to spill it all over your schoolwork. So if you have to have a drink, you could certainly go do it. You just have to go get it over there by the water fountain or whatever it is. So again, the nuance to it, that's what I'm trying to introduce to him, that none of this is cut and dry. None of this is blanket statement where you blindly break the rules or you blindly follow the rules. It may not be obvious. You need to think. You need to really understand it. And then we went through some more real life examples. He's learned about Martin Luther King Jr. So we talked about rules around segregation and how, people of color and black people were treated. And that resonated with him, where he understood. And I said, at some point, that was the rule. That was the law, right? If a black person tried to go to the restaurant that we were eating at and they went into the restaurant, they would get arrested. They wouldn't be able to go on the school bus with you. And that, his reaction to that was anger mainly. But again, he understood like, oh, okay, but so that's a rule where it may not be a good rule. And, you get the idea. So not a crisis, right? I can understand the logic of the school to some extent. And obviously, I know as a parent, I play some role in teaching my kids. So that's what I did. But what I found myself questioning at the end of it is, I understand the first level why. Again, I understand the first level why of why the school is teaching it that way. They're young. They probably think they're not that mentally sophisticated enough. Not insultingly, but just aren't. They need structure and order in the classroom, so you teach it that way. That's the base and the foundation you build off of. And they might even be thinking, if I give them the benefit of the doubt, eventually you add in some of the more nuance and complexity when they get accustomed to it. But I think there's a huge potential miss there. I think the assumption that you can turn it on and turn it off, and you could teach them and condition them that, yeah, you follow rules, and to be a good citizen, you have to follow the rule, and we have to do it, just do it, and don't question, don't break it, you just do it. To assume at some point in life you can switch that after that conditioning, I don't know that that's true. I think, as I've talked about before, at that age for kids, their minds are so open and so somewhat pure and vulnerable, frankly, that conditioning may not turn off. And, it makes me wonder too, why, again, I can understand why you need to be balanced. I can understand why you can't not teach about rules. You have to teach them that you need to follow the rules to some extent. But why is the weighting so heavily skewed that way? Why is that the focus where that we obviously have to teach them? Why are we dismissing the importance of teaching them to question and to understand the rules and that bad rules may exist? It just seems like a strange calculation around it to say, this is the obvious, right? This one will teach, that one's not as important to us, or the impact's not as bad if they don't understand that. I believe it is, right? That fear that if you don't have order and structure in the classroom and there's chaos, that's a bad thing. I don't disagree. But I don't for a second believe that is somehow worse than the idea of conditioning kids to just blindly follow a rule and to not question. That is, in my mind, at least equally as bad. It happens on a different time horizon, but it's still really bad. So we need to calculate those things accurately and say, hey, when we teach this, we need to teach it in such a way to account for both of them.